Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move that leave be given to bring in a bill to allow persons descended from individuals of the British Indian Ocean Territory to register as British Overseas Territory citizens and for connected purposes. Mr. Speaker, this bill will allow individuals descended from the Chagos Islands to register as British citizens in recognition of the fact that their parents and grandparents were forcibly exiled from this UK overseas territory. It seeks to ensure a measure of justice for those who lost their homeland and all it represented in the late 1960s. The treatment of the Chagosian people has been raised many times in this House and in Westminster Hall, not only by myself, but by many colleagues on the Chagos All-Party Parliamentary Group, of which it's my privilege to serve as Vice Chair. It is important for me to place on record my thanks to colleagues on both sides of the House for the support this bill has received, including those sponsoring this legislation from, Mr. Speaker, 7 parties represented in this place. The good wishes of Parliament for the Chagosian people continue not only to hold firm, but indeed to grow in strength. Mr. Speaker, I'm sure I need not recap on the tragic events that have led to this moment, but to put this bill into context and to grasp the gravity of Chagosian history, I believe it's necessary. It was almost half a century ago that then Prime Minister Harold Wilson gave an order in Council to remove the inhabitants of the British Indian Ocean Territory so a UK-US military base could be established on the strategic main island of Diego Garcia. In the years that followed, a community that had lived peacefully found themselves exiled and ignored with scant regard for their rights or well-being. We cannot change history, but we can support those removed from their homeland and their descendants who are not covered by existing law and protections as Britons they should enjoy. Mr. Speaker, currently legislation assumes that just one generation of Chagosians will be born in exile. And while many members of the community born in exile have received British citizenship, their children have not. As such, when these families have come to the UK, as is their right, their children are treated as immigrants like any other by the Home Office. Therefore, they are subject to the usual financial costs and administrative implications too. At this time, we can ease that burden. We can provide assistance to those whose story is not recognised in the country which removed them from their place, a British territory they call home. Of course, had the population not been evicted half a century ago, all born on the islands would already have British citizenship status. Mr. Speaker, Crawley is home to perhaps the largest Chagosian population in the world, and it's my privilege to stand up for this community in Parliament and locally. Today I ask honourable and right honourable members to allow this bill to progress and allow those descended from individuals born on the British Indian Ocean Territory the ability to register as British citizens. The motion would simplify nationality law so that anyone who can prove that they are of Chagosian descent becomes eligible to register as a British Overseas Territory citizen. I continue to support the right of return of the Chagosian people. This would likely be a staggered process, and Mr. Speaker, I am in no way convinced by the Foreign and Commonwealth Office objection to the pilot resettlement. In 2016, the government announced that rather than a right of return, there would be a support package of £40 million delivered over a 10-year period to go towards the Chagos community in Crawley, elsewhere in the United Kingdom, and indeed in Mauritius and the Seychelles, where most were exiled too. The Foreign and Commonwealth Office are continuing to engage with local authorities, including my own, with regard to this assistance. There is a real importance to ensuring the support goes as far as it can and leaves a long-standing mark for the benefit of those who are exiled and their descendants. This is an issue I have continued to raise on behalf of my constituents, including receiving an apology from the Minister of State for Europe and the Americas for the UK's historic treatment of the Chagosian people. And I have also welcomed constituents who have organised petitions in support of this community to 10 Downing Street. Mr. Speaker, it is easy to talk about what happened half a century ago, to speak of a £40 million package, or to talk about justice for the Chagosian community. But behind each of these subjects is the knowledge that we are talking about people, a number of whom who are here in Westminster today, and many more who will be watching across the country and indeed around the world. On previous occasions, when this issue has been debated in Parliament, there's been a strong Chagosian contingent watching in the public gallery, and I'm pleased to say, Mr. Speaker, we are again joined by members of the community. Their dignity and their dedication in campaigning to have back what was taken from them is an inspiration, and this community which is at the forefront of our thoughts today. Mr. Speaker, I do want to praise the government's wider work in the field of human rights. In particular, the Foreign and Commonwealth Office's 4 main priorities for tackling modern slavery: defending freedom of religion or belief and freedom of expression, ending inequality and discrimination, and promoting democracy. The work of the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, spearheaded by my right honourable friends, the Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary, is vital and deserves our support. British work on these issues throughout the world, particularly with tomorrow's launch here in Parliament of the 2018 World Watch List in mind, also represents what we stand for. I am sure that all in this House would agree with the salience of such values forming a vital part of our foreign policy. However, the treatment of the Chagosian people by successive British governments remains a shameful aspect on our past, and indeed still today in the present. Mr. Speaker, I mentioned earlier the Chagos Islands Party Parliamentary Group, of which I'm Vice Chair, and at this point I would like to pay tribute to the group's chairman, my honourable friend, the member for Romford, who has with steadfast vigour stood up for the rights of the Chagosian people. I'm not also questioning the issue of UK sovereignty over the British Indian Ocean Territory. Indeed, I'm grateful for my right honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary, for his continued defence of UK sovereignty over this territory. But, Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, around the world, our great nation is known for its values, including the traditional sense of British fair play. I am a patriot and I love my country, and we do have a proud history and, I believe, a bright future. But our nation's treatment of the Chagosian people is a blight on our country's conscience, and one which we can start to put right with helping these Britons all become British Overseas Territory citizens. And I commend this bill to the House.